This information is for educational purposes only and is not intended for medical advice.
Welcome to Enhancing the Human. I'm Dr. Jena, a renowned expert in the field of human enhancement. I've spent decades of my life exploring all aspects of human health, which has allowed me to take people from extreme injury and disability to peak athletic performance. I use cutting-edge advancements, breakthrough technologies, and scientific insights to push the boundaries of human capabilities. The human body is able to do so much more than you think. Let's start enhancing the human. Hello and welcome to Enhancing the Human podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jena. Today we interview Brett Bartholomew. He is a keynote speaker, he is a leadership consultant, and he's the founder of the company, The Art of Coaching. He's spent 15 plus years working with professionals and Olympic athletes across 23 sports worldwide. Today he brings information to us about communication and human psychology. Human psychology is so important and it influences every other part of human behavior and every other aspect of your life. It's so important and it's so intriguing to see how he views the world. Let's get to it.
All right. What can I do to make this great for you?
No, it's just all about, I told you about how you're impacting the world. You're doing your doctoral program right now, correct? Is that why you're researching everything with?
No, I'm working on a new book. So, they're related. So my book is related to everything that I've been doing. All that ties into our business. And so, but yeah, I'm in the mix of working on a new book, which will come out next year.
Amazing. What prompted that? I know that you had a hard time with the first, not a hard time, but it's a lot writing a book. I'm actually currently writing a book too.
Yeah, no, it's just one, you have very tight constraints. You have incredibly tight constraints about how many words you can put on, how many pages. You're talking about a lot of complex topics. Like a lot of this is about leadership, communication. With that, you're innately going to talk about things like perception and psychology and power dynamics. So to try to get your point across in a very, very, very simple way when you've lived, breathed, and researched this stuff for a long time is always difficult. And then, you're always trying to meet the expectations of everybody. But I've gotten over that now. I know who this book is for and who it's not. So that's easier. But it's a deadline. It's 3 years in the making and it's got to be done in less than a month.
But I feel like you do well under high stress environments, and that's because you've mastered yourself as a whole. And that's why you, like you said, you marketed to a certain group of people, because you have to understand, and people have to understand, when you don't understand yourself, your perception of the world is different than others, So I feel like you mastered yourself. You try to understand what you do, why you do it. And that's a whole part of communication, because you can know a lot, but if you don't know how to communicate to people, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, it's understanding yourself is one part of it, understanding the broader context and everybody else and various communication styles that they prefer is another piece. And that's, the biggest illusion about communication is that it's actually taken place. People don't know how to, we forget, can't read somebody's mind. And so because so many people interact over digital means and mediums now, you're not able to pick up on tonality. You're not able to pick up clearly on intent. And so it creates a lot of conflict. It creates a lot of misunderstanding.
Because the person's perceiving from their point of view.
Yeah.
And if they're not open for other points of view, then.
Yep. No, you said it perfectly. Yeah. It's just like a big filter. Like I imagine there's a big glass wall or plexiglass wall between us that distorts our language. So you say, Brett, how was your day? And I interpret it because of my own life and baggage and whatever else is, hey, Brett, I hate you, or I'm not really interested. And then people bring so much into every interaction. It's almost like we're schizophrenic, and I'm not making light of a condition. I'm saying that we have our internal self-talk, the way we communicate externally. That other person has their own internal self-talk, the way they're communicating. So right now, even with you and me, it's like there's 4 people in the room.
Mm-hmm. And then if you're breathing deeply or if you're hyperventilating, you don't see as clearly and your thoughts can be jumbled. So it all is dependent on your ability to control your internal and external environment to some extent, or you're internal enough to not let the external disrupt you.
Yeah, no, very well said. Perfect. It's almost like that you're somebody that's thought about this stuff strategically before, that you've tried to figure yourself out.
Twice. But I feel like it started, how many years ago was that? So I love to learn things and do things that I'm not good at. and basically pry open my weaknesses and failures and just see what's going on. So that's how you grow. And I remember I was stuck in what you were talking about. I couldn't understand why people took what I said the wrong way. And I meant, and I came from love, but people were perceiving it differently. And so I was trying to learn how to communicate better, and that's where I took your course. And I appreciate your course because it helped a lot, and it really uncovered a lot. And that was really hard for me. I remember you saying you were disappointed. It's the hardest thing. I seem like an extrovert, but I'm introvert, and acting and doing things and getting out of my comfort zone in public is hard. FYI.
First of all, I never said I was disappointed. The word was surprised. And
you did say surprised.
That is tough, because I even think that was one of our early pilot courses, and I always get embarrassed of early work because it's changed so much since then. And you start wondering, I think anybody does, if you provided people with maximum value. So I'll assume blame for that. But yeah, I mean, listen, I think the biggest thing that would help most people is I get asked more than anything else, if there's anything people should know about communication, what is it? And most people are just going to tell you, listen. And of course, that's important. Then we can go into that too. But I'd say the thing that could help people most today is recognizing, and this goes in line with what you stated, that misunderstanding should be the baseline expectation. When you can't read other people's minds, they can't read yours. Most people never get trained. Think about it. People will work on improving their dietary habits. They'll go to the gym. They'll work on their finances and their business. How many people do you know actively work on training to become better communicators? Not very many. And,
right.
And what you can have is a lot of people that think, well, yeah, I'm pretty good at it. I mean, we would literally have people that would say, well, I bartended for a number of years. I did. Oh, awesome. Like, I wake up a dad every day. That doesn't mean that I'm passively just better at it. You need to get, it's a skill. Think about how long it took you to get great at what you do. Could you do that without practicing and getting feedback and being hands-on?
And exploring the depths of what I'm not comfortable with or what I feel fearful towards.
Yep.
Because if you're not looking at that, you can't grow, and then you don't understand yourself within those environments. So it's one of the most important things ever.
Spot on. Yeah. People don't really want to do that. And we've all been through those phases in our life. It's really hard to ask ourselves, where might I be the problem? It's very, very easy, on the other hand, to just point at somebody else. And this is something I'm struggling with the part of my book right now is I know I'm writing this book for people that actually want to do the hard work and go inside of themselves and figure some stuff out. But there's a certain population out there that they just want a book that's going to help them deal with everybody else. And it's like, yeah, it's going to do that too. But there's a reason Sun Tzu said, know thyself, know thy enemy. Like, you need to get out of your own way first, and you need to recognize where your misconceptions and all that lie so that you can figure out other people.
And it helps every other aspect of your life. So if you can't communicate, everything else is harder, because not only are you misconstruing things, but you have other people misunderstanding what you're trying to say and what your message is. So I completely understand that. And that's the thing is, I learned, and you were in LA for a while and I'm out here now. And so I really learned out here that you just let those people think what they want to think, because I look at them like children, like, oh, young one, like, you don't even understand your perception in front of you. How are you going to understand deeper, meaningful things? So it's just like a little crutch, but you just let them be, and they'll come around at their own time. They have to learn their lessons or hit a few more walls before coming to the other side. But it's good because it's important what you do.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, likewise. And you bring up a really pertinent point, because it reminds me of somebody that was actually in the same course you were in. And they were very, very much, their boss had made them come and had said, hey, very technically smart kid, really sharp, needs to work on this side of things, doesn't think he needs to, whatever. He did not engage at all, got very high and mighty. You could just tell he didn't want to be there. 3 years later, sends me a DM on Instagram and says, I'm sorry, I didn't take that seriously then. It's since bit me in the ass. And I don't take any perverse sense of joy out of that. I'm glad that he recognized that. I actually get more frustrated, because I tend to, you want people to know that earlier. It's really frustrating. And I know you share this idea, but correct me if I'm wrong. we live in a society that still wants to obsess about biohacking and stuff that impacts the 1%. All good, but why don't you focus on the things that impact you every day in every aspect of your life? But a lot of that, you can't take a supplement for communication. So, not really sexy.
But it's also another thing of ignorance. The corporate companies want them to be like, what's the next best thing so they can consume. So I think it's important for us to educate people and just let them know that who cares about, doing a recovery session with that, piece or that device for 30 minutes when you're not breathing or
Right.
you haven't slept in more than an hour. Like it doesn't matter. You're not going to move the needle at all. So just I remind people that all the time because I kind of tend to play into that sometimes where I'm like, oh, I can see that they don't understand. Now I don't care that they don't understand. It's my job to show them. Like, no, that's no. And then they're like,
Yeah.
no. You could keep going, but this is gonna make a change. And unless you do that, and until your ego allows that to get in there, like you're not gonna progress the way you can because the body is amazing just on its own
Yeah.
when
No,
you
and you have
master
always
it.
done a good job of that. I mean, you and I were working out together one day and you noticed that I wasn't breathing because I can tend to be a pretty tense person. Plus, I also have massive issues with my nose from my boxing days that I got to get surgery on. So it's very tough for me to do nasal breathing. And you didn't come up to me and say, well, hey, put on these infrared goggles, count to 10, wiggle your toes, wear an aura ring, do a backflip, and now you're good. And you didn't start giving me the vibrating palm to the sternum, right? You just said, try this, try that. Cool, works, let's go. Um, and so just pragmatism and practicality, it gets
Yes.
lost. But I think it's just important for people to recognize that it happens to all of us. There's always areas in our life where we're going to be a pain in the ass, not as self-aware as we could be. What's important is that you get around outputs that allow you to work on that in a non-judgmental place. So that's what we try to put together either through our mentoring or our courses at Art of Coaching.
I love that. And that's the thing is, the shame that people give you or that you feel when people are judging you, it just creates this environment where you shut down more. And we're all animals, and that's what our response is. We feel a threat, and so we shut down and we want to isolate or go into our impulsive behaviors more. So unless you're aware of that, you have no idea how you're even impacting the world. So it's so pertinent to understand. And you're one of the only courses I know that does this.
And it's interesting you say that because we're the only course that we know that does it too. And that was it's tricky because as a business owner, sometimes you can see a gap in the market, but that doesn't mean there's a market in the gap, right? Like, let's say somebody listening to this is like, oh my God, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to go sell trombone oil because I think there's not a lot of trombone oil. And you're like, well, yeah, but there's, I don't know how many trombones there are in the world or people buying trombone oil. You might not want to do that. And so when we were thinking about doing this, we're like, hey, what's the likelihood that people are going to want to come and get uncomfortable and do this? Most things people want to go and work out or they want to do this, and that's great. Like there's something for everybody. But what we started to find as we stuck with it is there are a lot of people that are at that point in life where they want to improve their relationship. Like they know they're going to argue with their spouse, so they at least want to argue more productively. They know they're going to deal with rude people, or even just a lot of my work is stuff that I worked on myself. I can get really frustrated with people. I can have a bad temper because I think a lot of times people just are selfish and they don't focus on reciprocity. So I can go work on those scenarios here. And we create role playing aspects where it's like, hey, Jena, you're going to play somebody who's very giving and loving and thoughtful. And you're going to come up against the antithesis of that. Somebody who's a taker, somebody that takes advantage of you, somebody that's rude. You're going to do this for about 3 minutes. Then we're going to come back. We're going to talk some strategy, put you back into it. And think about that. That's like role play for real life. So it's tricky because it is only for a very specific part of the population. But that's where I think, and I think you'd agree, just like your methods, that's a smart business at the end of the day when you're not for everybody.
Right.
But you have to be able to stick it out because, like you're not going to be some millionaire overnight. And I think that's what a lot of people really want.
Well, I feel like those are the people looking at the more superficial things and people looking at the deeper meaning that are actually going to, create longevity long term. They're the ones that want this. And it's so important because it's important to give this to people in a way. And it's a lot bigger than you think. It's just people don't understand it. So if you actually, show this to people in a way that it can relate to them, it will change their life. And every other aspect of your life gets better and gets easier because otherwise you're working against yourself. You don't know why you're mad. You make things worse. You're in an argument and you start fighting more because you got angry and you let your ego take over. So things like that where you get in your own way. And so as a business owner, there's so many stressors as it is. We need to get out of our own way and not have ourselves be something we're fighting against. So it's
and
a lot.
there's no better example than what you do too, right? You can have HR Grumpskins come lay on your table and all of a sudden you can, help mobilize his ankle, work on his calf a little bit, do this. And all of a sudden, like the guy's back doesn't feel like trash for the first time in 10 years. He can taste colors and now he can make love to his wife in 80 positions and you're his God now, right? Like there's a very kind of tangible, like, boom, sucker, you're better. What we tell people with communication strategy is, hey, there is going to be a period where you're still going to feel frustrated because you've trained, other people haven't, but it gives you even though it's not going to give you this instant gratification, it is going to give you the knowledge that you're taking control of circumstances. You're doing what you can do to improve, and it should help you see the world in a different way. And then what other people have taken from it is, oh, now I know how to market my business. Like we've kind of become this de facto marketing agency. Because there's people that, just like people go to you that don't really move correctly or they're not in touch with their own body. There's a lot of people that are too close to their own brand and their own business. They're very knowledgeable. They're very skilled. They provide a lot of value, but they don't know how to speak to it because they haven't had that outside perspective. And so that's where we found kind of, a big ROI for some people is not just the relationships, but now, oh yeah, it makes sense what I do, how I perceive things, how I behave. I don't lose my shit at my kids the same way. That's the ultimate goal.
I'm telling you, you undermine it a little more than you should. People love this. I do this all day long. So I went to like professional school for this, which is, Celebrity Housewives 101. And it's like trying to dodge bullets while still being friendly and like, juggling at the same time because you have 7 layers of manipulation coming at you. And I'm like, what is happening? And I have to remain calm. And like, so I swear to God, it's one of the best things. So after your course, just going over these things. And I remember tossing ideas back and forth with my brother, like you break down a situation because nothing's more frustrating and worse feeling overall than miscommunicating someone or having your message not be heard in the right way. So, saying something to someone and then they took it wrong and then they think you're some asshole and you feel that and you're like, but I didn't mean it like that. So I'm telling you, there's more of a need for this and a want for this because I do this with my employees too. I take screenshots of like different communications where I'm like, this is not what's happening. And the person still doesn't understand. And they reply back like, all right, we'll see you tomorrow. And I'm like, and so we go over how to respond in ways where you're still respected, but you're not being a jerk, because you don't want to lower yourself either. You want to come. I love coming from a place of love.
Yeah, no, you have to. And where we've seen, to your point, is where we've seen people take the most interest is in industries related to tech, finance, law enforcement, the military, physical therapy, where there's very clear-cut consequences if these things don't go well, right? Where when we started early on, I was still in strength and conditioning. And so you would get some strength coaches that they were a part of organizations that largely didn't require them to be strong communicators because they had some kind of authority where they could just make athletes do something, right? Or the head coach would get on them. But in professions where that power is not absolute, and in no situation is it truly, if you really dissect it. But when you have a tech organization saying, hey, our CEO just sent out a tweet the other day that cost us $13 million. You don't have to buy into that, right? It's just black and white. Or we were working with a group of engineers in San Francisco, and we forget how hard this is. I'm like, why'd you guys bring me in? An incredibly impressive organization, unbelievable. You'd almost think they have everything figured out. And they just say, we have no idea how to deal with conflict. We have a lot of genius people who are passive aggressive. They view conflict as there's nothing more common, right? Like than people that like that's the flaw of genius is it needs an audience and it needs to be stroked all the time. Otherwise, like people just, we did that. We did in-house kind of strategic role playing, debriefing, and we just tell people, chill out a little bit. Like this isn't pass or fail. Yes, role playing is going to bring your nervous system up a little bit. There's a threat, there's a fear, but it's no different than when you use an ice bath or when you use scraping or forms of manual therapy. There's this initial like, whoa. And then you start to calm down once you realize, hey, this is safe and we're doing this for a very clear purpose and it's for a limited amount of time. So, and that was something I thought you excelled at because you could tell that you balance so much and you're not able to compartmentalize nobody in your position is able to compartmentalize that. So that's another thing that I thought you did well. That role play makes you have to stop, get the other shit out of your head and be present in the moment. It's like sparring. You've boxed. Can you think about 30 other things when you're boxing and still like, no.
You're knocked out on the floor.
Yeah. Yeah.
While you're thinking about 100%. Those things.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
It's so interesting, but I'm glad companies are reaching out like that because just even knowing themselves enough to know there is a weakness there is admirable. I love that because most people want to know everything. And we talked about this before a long time ago when I was reading your first book, but just the people behind the curtain always thinking like, we have to have everything figured out that, everyone's doing it better. And so we create that fear environment within ourselves. And then we're in this constant state of threat and sympathetic nervous system being heightened. So it's important to calm down, breathe for a second and let your body get some oxygen to the brain so you can think clearly. Because that's all it is. We're just animals trying to survive.
100%. And it was actually something I wanted to ask you and not to turn the interview around, but you brought up an excellent point. One of the things I'm writing about right now is the consequences of trying to live up to unrealistic ideals. Now, just to ground this, right? Coming up as a coach, I was often hit with myths that, well-intentioned or not, right? They were always kind of like the things, hey, a leader shouldn't quit. They should always be positive. They should always be a servant or have this act of, servant leadership. A leader knows the right things to do. It was this very heroic, idealistic standard that I always just felt like, man, this is kind of one, tough to live up to. Two, I don't know that it's always relatable. And three, it's not really a fit for every context. But you see so many people try to live up to that. And I wonder, with all that you've tackled, with all that you've accomplished, with all that you still strive to do, have you ever had a point in your life where you tried to live up to an ideal? Do you even agree with some of the messaging that's out there around that? Or have you had a different experience?
No, and I don't really agree because a lot of the stuff that we see, sometimes it's corporatized and it's made in a way that makes you feel a certain way. So you buy certain things or so you feel less so that you can, validate yourself externally. And I always think about if I'm not healthy, I can't help anybody else. And so there was a part where I learned a big lesson recently where I hired a friend and, I look like I have everything together. I'm wearing 75 hats at once. And I'm like, hey, I'm struggling. I need someone I can trust, especially being out in LA. So I need you to come in. Well, it was like, okay, came in, but was also doing things like, hey, I don't have a car, so can you front me some money? Hey, I just got a company card. I went and paid for things, but I didn't ask. And I'm like, hey, excuse me. You can't just spend the company money without asking. Like you asked, there's a protocol here. And like gaslit me and was like, oh, you're being ridiculous. You've just been around people that you don't trust too much. I would never spend money incorrectly. I'd always do things for your benefit. I don't care why you're doing it. The protocol is you don't just spend money, you ask. And I gaslit myself within that because she is my friend or she was my friend at the time. And it's like, I was like, oh, I'm sorry, maybe that is not right. And I'm like, you know what? No, that's not okay. That's not how we run things. It is my business. And there was still no communication there. She still did not see it. And then I would ask her to do things and she'd be like, hey, I think you wanted it this way, but I thought this would be better and would send me. I didn't ask to get your opinion. This is how I have so much experience in what I do. And I break down things in a way where I'm trying to learn from every situation and trying to see where I am the problem always, even if I'm not the problem, because we can always grow. So I'm like, I tried to speak my mind. And instead of getting mad at myself, I saw myself, okay, first I let her do her thing. And I'm like, all right, that was my fault. Now I'm going to set some boundaries. Things still weren't going the right way. And I'm like, it's not working out. And I'm not going to do this to myself anymore. And it took a lot because there's a lot within that where you're, not ruining, but you're severing a relationship with someone and maybe she'll learn down the line that she was out of line, but I can't, that's not my problem right now. I need some help and I need someone I can trust within my business with my other employees. So that's just where we are right now. And I feel like it was like an accomplishment for me to go through that whole thing and realize that, because I felt bad. She didn't see my side. And I'm like, that's not my problem.
Yeah.
This isn't for you. I fronted you the money for a call. Like there's so many things that I had to do to get you to help me for like a month. And I'm like, man. And then it was over and she's like, oh, my back hurts. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like,
Yeah.
I have a brain cyst. Can we not talk about your back when you left before Christmas?
And that's a prime example of, I'm sorry you went through that. I know that's frustrating and I can only imagine.
No, but you learn and it's a good thing. It was necessary, apparently.
Well, and that's an example of, one of the things that we critique because you can't talk about, communication without inherently having leadership tie-ins and whatever and entrepreneurship. But that's an idea of this idea of, a true leader should always be a servant leader. Well, there's limits and boundaries to that. We had staff and there's some staff that they honor those boundaries. And there's some staff that, wasn't going to get anything done unless every circumstance was perfect for them. And they'd always kind of use the excuse that they didn't know how to do this or know how to do that. And it's okay. Well, I can help you to a degree, but then I need to pull off because I have my own stuff I need to do. And so when you look at this, that's kind of what we're exploring right now is when you look at this, and I love you made up a word that I'm totally going to use. You talked about corporatize, and that probably is a word, but the leadership is very much presented as romanticized, commercialized, corporatized, and all in all, you could just say sterilized. And then they give people this idea that you're not a good person if you don't live up to this standard. If no matter what happens to you, if you're just not taking it with grace and gratitude and whatever and so that coincides then with people feeling one, a sense of burnout and inefficacy because they can't, they're trying to be something that they're not. And then two, it just constantly perpetuates this image of the ideal self. We need to be the ideal self. And I think people forget that the ideal is going to change depending on the situation. What's ideal? There are some times where you need to lose your shit on somebody. There are some times when you do need to be calm and just maintain that demeanor. And no, not everybody's going to get a user guide to know exactly when those times are. That's another thing that drives me nuts is you'll get people that will say, well, what exact times? I'm like, well, I can give you guidelines here, but that's going to depend. Think about what you and I are talking about, even in terms of communication, value, culture, leadership. How somebody values that in Los Angeles is very different than how somebody values any of those things in Japan. There's so many unique things that are mediating variables of whether somebody thought that was kind, that was rude, that was blank. And so anyway.
And it's true. And the funny thing was that same person was saying, I'm just trying to be kind. And we haven't talked on the phone since because she's like, I just need to gather my mental health. And I'm like, so my mental health is not considered, but it's crazy how the people only perceive their part of things. And so it's sad in a way, but I feel like, again, you don't have to win people's battles. They have to learn their own lessons. But I was proud of myself for not wanting to be the ideal because I'm strong, but I wear so many hats. I can only do so much. And as much as I'm being kind and it's looked, right past, when I'm saying I need help, I need help. And so if you're not going to give me that, the situation goes bad. Now I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
I tell you to do this and you tell me to do that.
and you speak to a point that is a lot about the conditioning we have growing up listening to these myths is we're the protagonists of our own story. So it is easy to just internalize how we feel and not consider everything else. And granted, there's a balance to that too. Like I talked about earlier, there was something on the news the other day that was like, hey, remember your employees are coming to work with things that go outside of their life. Be kind, ask them what's up. And I don't disagree that you need to take an interest in your people and the people that you work with, and you need to be compassionate. But I also there's a balance here, right? We can't be therapists for everybody and they're not supposed to be therapists for us. What you have to do is figure out, all right, how do I feel? What am I struggling with? How can I communicate that? How can I medicate? Hey, I didn't sleep really well and my toddlers went crazy. So if I seem a bit off today or I'm snappy, apologies in advance. I'll try not to, but I just want to kind of give you that heads up. And hopefully that other person says, cool, get it. I appreciate the fact that you gave that. Just bring information to the table. If you don't meta communicate, and then you expect somebody else to adapt to you, you're the asshole.
Right. No, the give and take too. I love that. The team. And then one of my patients said he's a head of marketing for a huge company. And he's like, it's like a football team. We all have to carry, we all have to do, it's a team effort. So, some of my employees were telling me about their day and this and that, and I'm sick and this is what's coming out. I don't need to know that. I can't take in the information I'm doing already. I don't need to know my husband went to the hospital, this, that, this. And I'm like, listen, it's not fair to me. And instead of gaslighting myself and trying to be the ideal, I'm like, listen, I need you to stop doing this. I need you to tell me in bullet point form, not 7 books. When I go back to my phone and I already have 100 missed messages and you write me a book this long text message, I can't do that. Just shorten it. And then still the person just kept doing it. And I'm like, listen, this is not working out. So just giving yourself that win and that understanding where you communicated correctly. Because before I used to not even understand how to communicate what I needed. And then I do it and I watch the person shit all over me. And I'm like, I don't understand what's happening. So just it's a constant learning experience because there's so many variables and everything's so dynamic. But that's why it's ever changing. And you have to constantly be learning these things. Otherwise, you're just limited, I feel, in every part of your life.
Yeah. I mean, what's the alternative, right? Because even when artificial intelligence continues to be more and more emergent, you're still going to have to interact with people. AI is going to be able to do a lot of things for us. It's going to make our life better in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day, people still want to connect with other people. And if I always fail to understand any argument not to work on those things. The key is to make it accessible. And I think that's hopefully what we're doing is, in the past, if you wanted to work on that, like you either did nothing or went to therapy. And therapy is great, but therapy is not the same as working on how you communicate. That's working on understanding aspects of yourself. But a lot of therapists are going to use forms of cognitive behavioral therapy. They're going to use a lot of, basically Socratic reasoning, motivational interviewing. They ethically can't sit there and tell you what to do. And they can't tell you everything about yourself. Like you've got to do that work. And so it just felt very odd that there wasn't this output that filled the gap. And even in businesses, right? Because there are corporations that will have legal counsel, like shit went wrong, right? Legal counsel will help. So it's gone wrong. We need to bring you in, and they do contracts, hopefully to prevent it from going wrong. But in the meantime, there's stuff going on every day that's emergent. The fact that, some of these organizations don't have communication strategists on a part of their staff that's like, hey, maybe before you send this, think about the communication styles of those involved. And some would argue, well, that's HR. No, Pam from HR is not doing that. Pam,
No,
we all know
not.
what Pam from HR is doing. She ain't doing that. What's Pam from HR really doing, Jena? We can't converse without telling, we've known each other too long to not have a dumb joke. And you're too random and hilarious. So what's Pam from HR doing?
She's eating the cupcakes in the break room.
Definitely eating the cupcakes, crossing the names off of people that she's going to sit there and say they didn't do their TPS reports correctly. So it's just, it is what it is. Friggin' Pam. She's just milking money from everybody.
But you bring up a good point because that's what I loved about during your course. You get to see real time other people's reactions too. So it's like, you could react a certain way, but then when you see someone react the way they react, you're like, wow, I never looked at it like that. So you're right. It gives you that real world experience of exactly what to do within the moment. And that's hard because it's harder. It's real time. You have to breathe. You have to have the person react right there and then. So it's so important. And I feel like hopefully people get the message because it's so important. And I feel people are. I have a lot of patients where if I give them this information, and there's resistance to it for a reason. I say that too with physical therapy. They're like, this is hard, blah, 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 like coordination, motor control. Yeah, because your body's sloppy and doesn't like to do this. It likes to compensate in your neck. And that's why your neck hurts. So are we going to move forward or what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So there's resistance because your body wants to stay safe and we're all animals and it's just trying to do what it can to stay comfortable and safe. So when there's resistance, feed into that. I love feeding into my resistance. I'm like, why don't I like this? What's going on here that I need to work on? And it's important. Otherwise, what are you doing as a human being?
Yeah.
Slopping through life like lumps of crab.
And I think that's where one thing I've tried to grow as a communicator is just trying to make things more accessible. because you do have to understand that inherently not everybody's going to be able to fly to a workshop or do this. So that was important for us to do one-to-one mentoring. Or sometimes people just need help better identifying where communication's the problem in their life. So what I try to say is, hey, just like you'd go through and audit your finances, if you're overspending and you realize that, like, yes, you're going to Costco, but you're going there every day, like, write down some of the things that have gone on in the past 24 hours to a week of your life and see which of those relate back to communication, which isn't just about expressing, it's about internalizing and receiving. And so when you sit there and say, okay, my son had to go to timeout because he acted up at dinner and it caused me to raise my voice. Okay, well, that's something related to state management. Or, hey, our business isn't working as well as I thought it did in this context, but another part of our business is killing it. Could I try to figure out what the messaging is that I'm using for this side of it and what the messaging is that I'm using for that, and dissect? Oh, okay. I'm using more inspirational appeals here. This one, I'm breaking down more logic-based things so it helps the audience understand it. Maybe I need to swap that. But when you help people realize where communication breakdowns occur, whether it's their kids, their spouse, themselves, or their business, now they've had the aha moment. Now I get it. It's kind of like people that didn't, then it's not as obvious to them as, from a diet standpoint, there aren't many people that could sit down and eat a massive chicken pot pie, a drenched Caesar salad, and guzzle a soda and be like, I didn't know it was bad for me. You kind of know. You kind of know that a massive chicken pot pie and like a salad that you could bathe yourself in is not awesome. Now, still,
why are you bathing yourselves in salad?
I don't know. I heard a song by The Weeknd. He was doing it. It sounded good. But like,
interesting.
With communication, people don't know that. They could think, well, look at me. I'll talk about my own fault. I'm very direct. Now, when I'm direct, that's a sign of respect. I'm not going to waste your time. I value you. I'm going to get to the point, especially if you're my client. I tell them, and one client said, you're the most respectful kick in the ass I've ever had. And I love that. Mm-hmm. But I've also had to realize where it's not good for me to be direct, And so I've had to be like, okay, this person, I need to be more empathizer, which even though that's a byproduct of me being direct, that doesn't appear like it is to them. So now I need to code switch a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yes. And you made a good point earlier talking about meeting people where they are, basically, because I spoke for this thing at USC, and this woman was there that was teaching breath work. And I was talking about box breathing and how just, if you're hyper stressed and you can't think and your body's freaking out and you have so much anxiety, just take a deep exhale and just hold it. And, I did half a box breathing, just hold it at the bottom and for 4 seconds and relax. And she got so angry that I was talking about breathing. And she's like, you need to find the guru I speak with, blah, 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 blah. And I don't even know how to say his name, but I'm like, all these people here, people have kids, like they're not going to go study in Egypt with this guy. And that'd be great. I'm not putting that down in any way, but you set people up for failure. These people already don't have time for breathing, let alone going to study and learn breathing, for a 3-week thing in the Amazon. So, just meeting people where they are and giving people options for what they have in the moments where, where they are.
Yeah.
Because it's otherwise you shame people and you create a worse off environment that makes them internalize more and then have more fear and more threat.
Yep. Yeah. And that even just goes with what we were talking about the ideal is, let's look at something that just doesn't, I think is a perpetually like just damaging myth of like a leader. And again, people can put whatever noun they want in there, should always be positive. Talk about meeting people where they are. Like, people are more likely to be inspired when your vision, appeal, or your approach aligns with their goals, drives, values, and self-concept. And so like, we'll get people that sometimes are surprised that their message didn't hit. And it's like, well, you kind of gave an idealistic, it was kind of idealistic messaging that was saturated with a lot of undertones of false hope. And really what you had was a no nonsense individual that wanted to be spoken to more directly there, and so it's tricky because it's not even just what we say. Sometimes it's how we behave in terms of meeting people where they are. And I acknowledge that's tough. I acknowledge I'm not able to always do it. That's why you do have to be addicted to the idea of just continual improvement. And that's why we call our workshop the apprenticeship, and hopefully that made sense. I'm sure there has to be situations even where you interview people on the show and they're great, but it's like you're trying to get them, it's like you're trying to align this messaging because you know what you want to get to, but they have their own thing, and you've just got to find that balance.
Yeah, and just I always call it planting seeds, if they're not ready in that moment, or you plant a little seed and you create a safe space. Like some of my patients that are like they want me to just work on them the whole time. And I'm like, I'm not doing you or I any favors, but you think that I'm trying to take advantage of you and get out of things, but little do you know you're not progressing because we're not coordinating the brain.
Yeah.
So I'm like, but I'm saying that right now because I'm recognizing it and I want you to see it. Yes, I will still work on you today, but I want you to know that this is just me taking your money and you're not getting any better. So like you kind of give them that realness in a safe way and it helps because then they're like, oh, okay. And they keep coming in repeating the same thing. And I'm like, no, that's not true. But that's the story you told yourself. But I'm just laying that on the table because you're not going to get past that until you get past what you understand.
Yeah.
And it helps planting seeds where they are at that moment. Otherwise, you just go in circles.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think
they come around.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. That's one thing about the tables. They always turn. And yeah, it's tricky. I just, the main thing is that what people have to do is just sometimes stop and think and do a little profile on themselves and say, okay, as a communicator, not as a human, because that can be a lot, but just like, how do I know I can communicate? Do I communicate in a more analytical fashion? Am I more of a relator? Do I use a lot of analogies, stories, metaphors? Am I more direct? Am I more empathetic? Like if you can just siphon it down, and sometimes it does pay to oversimplify, knowing that nobody's ever just one. But if you do know, all right, on one side is more analytical people and direct people in terms of communication styles. On the other side are people that are more relators and empathizers. Like that helps you. That helps you realize like, okay, this client is more of this. It gives you a little bit of an archetype, which isn't a judgment or a bucket. It's a starting point. It's a hypothesis. It's part of the scientific method. And then you try to say, all right, if I know I'm here and I feel like maybe they're there, let's try this. What do I want to say to them? And then how can I do this? And it just takes some practice and some forethought. And that is generally what people say. If you were to say, what is one thing people end up saying after they come to your stuff, it's verbatim. The last guy that we had, he's like, there's so much more to communication than I thought. And I recognize that it can cost me time and energy to do this work up front, but I also recognize that it costs me way more on the back end to fix it if I don't do it.
And it impacts every aspect of your life. And it is a little recipe, when people understand that everything can be named and there are categories that people fit in and you can expand on the other categories. So say you are, limited in this area of communication, you can work on that with different tactics and you break it all down and you give handouts and you allow people to understand the basics of communication as a whole so that they can dissect what parts they need to work on. And then you go into it real time, which is so helpful.
Yeah, no, you hit that point on the head. So what are some other things that you think could be helpful to your audience? How can I be more helpful and lock and load? Because I want to make sure people feel served and that they got, served. I shouldn't say that. Supported.
I got served.
You got served. Yeah, in the dance battle.
No.
Yeah, like you have really good insights around this stuff.
I do, but I've learned it because I could see where I'd say something and I'd be like, they didn't understand anything I said. And I've even had people a long time ago before I recognized how to communicate. They were like, people take what you say the wrong way because people have an understanding of what they believe I am. And until they get rid of that and see through a different lens, they will see me as what they see me as. So,
Yep.
Even with my intent, it doesn't matter. So I think just, again, not living behind the curtain of understanding that it takes people a lot to get good at this stuff. And there is a recipe and there are tactics that you can use to help people. So I think it's important. And I think that your communication class helped me break down and understand. That was the beginning of everything because I was like, I don't know why the same things keep happening and I keep having the same problems. I could recognize that there were patterns, but I didn't understand what the hell was going on. And so that for me was important to explore. And so, you being my friend, remember back in the day, so how Brett and I know each other, Brett shadowed me when I worked with NASCAR.
Yeah.
So he came to one of the races and there was a rain out. And so we got to hang out. During rain outs in NASCAR, you just sit around, eat food, hang out with the sponsors and, get sticky hands and hit bald people in the head so it sticks right in their face. But it was interesting because that I wasn't good at communicating then. I was in a relationship where, my opinion was suppressed a little bit, and I let that change me. And I really wanted to explore why that happened and just get stronger in who I was. And that your course was the beginning of that. So I had moved to LA after NASCAR, and I just remember being like, hey, I'm having trouble communicating. I'd love to take your course. And that was the beginning of my journey, which is amazing because I was lost. So no one has it figured out. It's explore.
If you don't mind me asking, what was, I want to think about how I want to phrase this. What was it that, why did it change you? What was it that suppressed you? And what, or more importantly, what term would you use to talk about how it changed you? Were you more of a people pleaser? Did you become passive?
Yeah.
What was the term that you would describe?
Well, so I was in grad school, and I was one of the only people in grad school that was actually working at the same time. You know how I like to be involved in different things. I'm volunteering, I'm dissecting till 3 a.m. I like to do a lot. So I put a lot on myself, and I didn't recognize that, people don't have integrity, and they could say things just to make you feel bad about yourself so that you feel less, so that they can manipulate you to do something else. And to not, once you feel like, okay, my opinion, I don't want to start a fight, then you kind of stop giving your opinion. And so slowly over time, I was like, what happened? Like, where'd my opinion go? I thought I had an opinion, and I was so strong, and I thought it was me. And I didn't necessarily recognize what was happening because I didn't understand communication. So I allowed it to happen. And then I'm like, what happened? Let's explore this. And I recognized it. And then when I started setting boundaries and just standing up for myself as a human being and the good person I was doing so much, and I was constantly giving. And I think just being in grad school and being consumed by everything at once and having my own business during that too, it just allowed me to get kind of smeared within it versus understand and step back and be able to see clearly. So I think just exploring it more was my passion after that, because I was like, how did I get there? And why did I allow that to happen? And what things can I do as a human being to change these situations, for the better, and maybe a little bit sooner, so that, because that took a lot away from me.
No, it
It
sounds like
was
it.
years and years of little jabbers where you're like, did they just insult me? I'm like, no, they didn't mean it like that. But I was like, maybe they did mean it like that. So there's ways where you can recognize what's going on, and you can set your boundaries ahead of time so that everyone's happy and healthy, because they're not doing well in that environment either. When you're enabling someone, you're making their lives bad too, because you're allowing them to feed into that narcissistic part of their brain, and that is detrimental for their well-being. So I think it's just taking responsibility and autonomy for what you do is important, because you can change what you do, not what anyone else does. But it gives you so much clarity. And I think just recognizing the different categories of communication, I'm like, wow, that's how I felt. Or I related a lot to the different things that you exposed in your class. So I think that really helped. And then once I understood there were categories of information, I'm like, let's explore each category. So then I just started expanding everything. Then I would ask my therapist different things. I got a therapist so I could understand different ways to communicate. And so just bringing everything together and exploring it in a safe way.
And one of the things, it means a lot knowing that you took that out of it, especially when you talk about different categories, because there are different, just like we talked about categories of communication styles. There's people have different drives, right? So we can siphon those things down. There's different influence tactics. There's ones that are a little bit more hard, like pressure tactics, or when we use rules, policies, and procedure, which have a place, right? People need to have deadlines. They need to know that there's cutoffs. And there's other tactics that are more rational, where you're going to try to explain things through using facts, figures, and statistics. Then there's others that are more personal, like, hey, Jena, we're friends. Can you grab lunch today and I'll get you tomorrow? Right. And so a lot of people, to your point, they don't even realize shit. Like, my boss, now that I see it, he almost always uses direct tactics at me. He is very analytical. Now I'm seeing it, and I am empathizer, and I'm always using personal and inspirational appeals. And so when he asks me for my plan and I just speak big picture and don't get details, he gets pissed. Now I get it, and this is something that it's funny, because talking about communication, I'm even struggling with my publisher. as you know, well, do you like any movies or TV shows? Do you watch any? Yeah, no, any of it's fine. But
Forensic
right.
Files.
So here's my point, and again, you can always disagree with me. Like, how boring would a movie or a show be if there was like no buildup? Like, if all this shit just happened at once, right? That'd be there's no point to that. Well, in my new book, in part 3 is when we really start getting into those tactics and communication styles. There's a lot of things we touch on prior to that. And the publisher's like, no, put this up earlier. Put this up. People are going to quit reading. And I'm like, no, because if people don't recognize the need for this, if you don't do enough buildup, if you don't show them the problems they deal with, like we have a whole chapter about burnout and what, like, the ramifications of if you feel like you're not living up to your own expectations and society's ideals. Like, the reader needs to be invested, and they're not going to be invested until they see themselves in the material. But it's so interesting because, like, everything now just people want so soon, and it's like, no, just slow down, explore some shit, see the world, and then we can continue. Then we can go deep. Am I wrong? Am I like the only one that thinks?
No, but that's just like, that's standing for what you're trying to, that's the same thing with me, like with my story with the soft tissue work, that's like me being like, all right, let me massage you every time. No, that's not right. That's not how you get to the end. And this carrot isn't something that everyone's going to get, it's for the people that want to really dive deep and understand and master each level along the way, not just get the quick fix of the, I do the cold tub once a day, but I don't sleep or eat or do anything else. So you're causing more stress, and you're creating an environment for your immune system that's lowering it and making you more susceptible for disease. So you're 100% right, but they don't see that because they're just trying to market. There's certain things with me too, with my business, where people are like, oh, we're going to do this. And I'm like, no, I don't like that because it's not my message. I don't care what society wants. I don't care what sells or whatever. I'm not trying to sell. I'm trying to do something in a way that has integrity towards the message. And I'm not going to waver in any way. So I think that's impressive that you stand tall, because we are constantly having things thrown at us like that, where you have to stay strong to your message, because people are always trying to sway you different ways, and you fall off enough to where you're like, no, we're not going away from this.
Yeah, it's tough though. I mean, because they have their own, talk about influence tactics and power bases, right? Like I have that. We talk about different power bases in the book. I have expert power, but they also have reward power, right? And so there's this middle ground. And so what you try to do is, and this is no different than communication, you try to think, okay, well, how can I make this work? All right, maybe in chapter 1 and 2 of the book, I don't give away the whole thing, but I find little ways to hint, or I drop little tips around the way. And then that way, when it gets to it, it's not so overwhelming. And how about that? Would that work? And so it's funny, even writing a book about communication strategy and our interpersonal or intrapersonal demons and the struggles of leadership, which mimic the struggles of life, in many ways, trying to live up to an ideal, is its like own case study. And I wanted to say that. I want to be like, you're making it in the book. I'm going to write it. I'm going to give you a fake name in the book, but I'm really talking about you, editor. You're the one I'm talking about. But yeah, it is tricky, and it's why my hairline has receded and I've gotten gray.
I feel the same way. Trust me. I'm freaking pulling my hair out. I can't take it. And then, I just moved from my facility where we had black mold. I was like, oh, I did see that on Forensic Files. But I'm just like, life comes at you. But I feel like life is pushing you so you can grow. And it's so important because it teaches you how to have patience and how to step back for a second. Because in order to be great, and I say that all the time to people, I don't just respond to how you feel. I don't care how you feel. I know what I know. Like you said, you're expert level. So if I don't care how you feel. Just like you gave me the link for your podcast. You're like, you signed up for my podcast. I'm like, fuck your podcast. Hey, dummy. Oh my gosh. But I think it's so important to constantly be learning, because you're never going to do something great if you just fall in line. And if you don't explore the ins and outs of what you see and what other people see, you'll just keep seeing the same thing. Yeah. And I want to see everything.
Yeah. Well point.
I keep on keeping on.
I think that's the take home message, is just think about the things in your life that don't only matter now, but they're going to matter still 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, from your standpoint, right? And from like people, how they move and how they treat their bodies, that's going to matter always. From my standpoint, and I know we share views on both of these things, like how you communicate, how you interact, not only with others, but yourself. And also just think of the advice you'd give your kids. I would love to tell my kid, hey, buddy, he's 4 right now. When he gets older, I'd love to say, hey, buddy, just being good at your job and keeping your head down are going to be enough for you to be successful. But that's not true. And so I am going to teach my son about the political realities of the world. I am going to teach my son that it's not always about being the hero or the servant, that you've got to be the anti-hero sometimes. And sometimes you've got to lean into a darker shade of gray of yourself. And that's up for him if he wants to do that. And so, it'll be interesting, but it's nice to know that there's people out there like you that value it. And it's awesome to see you continue to do what you do and get uncomfortable. It gives me hope that there's more humans out there that aren't just looking to be spoon-fed and stay in their little cocoon of comfort.
Oh, everyone loves it. And if you propose it in a certain way, I'm telling you, these CEOs and things out here, they're just like, I love this. But it took a lot for me to understand what to say, how to say it, especially being a female in, a male dominated industry. They're like, oh, honey, you don't know. And I'm like, trust me, I do know.
Yeah.
Like I've found out over time.
Yep.
And like, if I didn't know, I explored and I researched, and I'm constantly staying up to date with the research. So it's so important. And it's good to see other points of view because you see the world through a different lens. And I feel like you have to in order to grow. So I appreciate what you do. And there's so many people that love this. So keep doing it. And I ask people the same questions every time. I want to see the number one behavior change that you think will lead to the biggest change in someone's life.
Yeah. I mean, just self-reflection or introspection. Why am I actually the way that I am? And don't allow yourself to get by with bullshit answers like, oh, I want to make a difference. Well, why do you want to make a difference? What does that look like? What would you tell yourself if you didn't do that? Like when people they act like they do self-reflection, but really they just allow themselves to get by with superficial answers. That's dangerous. But if you don't know your demons, you don't know yourself, you don't know your dark side, you don't know shit.
Exactly. And then you keep responding defensively. People don't recognize because you're in defense mode because you're not looking at the true meaning and motivation behind what you're doing. So yeah, it's the best thing. Know the ins and outs of every part of who you are. And then if you could go back and tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?
If I could go back and tell, how young am I here?
Let's say 2.5. No, I'm just kidding.
If I could do 2.5.
Just one piece of advice.
Yeah, I would trust your instincts. There's a lot of validity to knowing that, hey, we need to think rationally. We need to slow down. We need to look at things from all angles. No question. But emotion can't be divorced from decision making. And we largely are not rational creatures anyway. And a lot of times when I have rationalized myself out of going with my gut, it didn't end up working well. Your instincts tell you something about your experiences. So they can't be the only thing, but like trusting your instincts is a really important thing.
100%. I always say that to people. So I appreciate that because it's unbelievable how many times I'm like, oh, I knew that. And then I didn't, and then you stop gaslighting yourself and you trust yourself every once in a while and you become stronger and connected to yourself, which allows you to be, we talked about this on another podcast with one of my professional boxing coaches. And we were just like, in order to be gentle, you understand yourself. So you understand how to communicate. Everything's objective. You don't have to be emotional and respond with anger or fear because you know what you're doing and see clearly.
100%.
Well, I appreciate that. I better get one of the new books and a signed t-shirt.
Absolutely. It comes out. I wish I could take, comes out next month. It comes out 2025. So we will see each other and talk before. You don't have one more question. I demand one more, like off color.
I love your questions. Let's hear it.
You give me a question. All right, here, I'm going to give you a question. This is going to be.
Oh, you a question.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a question then now let's see. What do you think is something most people misunderstand about you?
I think people have their experience of what they think women should do or what they think, like sometimes, because I'm very strong as a woman. And so, they think I work out every day or, and it's just funny what people will block themselves from doing by assuming. So they assume things and they're like, just like the people behind the curtain, they're like, I could never do that. And I was not always here. I've worked on my weaknesses in order to get this strong and be able to see this clearly enough to be independent with my thoughts and move forward with what I want to do in life. So you get out of your own way and sky's the limit with what you can produce in the world. And I feel like it's so important to not just bias yourself and understand the human is biased. So I always do that. I step back and I'm like, let me make sure I'm not being a jerk here. I know I'm biased and I know I learn about the human body and human psychology and how we are biased. So let's make sure we're coming from a good place and constantly keeping ourselves in check because we're human beings and we make mistakes. So just not assuming just because I'm strong, I have all the answers, or like people constantly, they're like, oh, you think you have it all together. Like, and they try to knock you down to like prove there's fault in you. There's fault in me. I don't know. I never said there wasn't. I mean, there's lots of fault. That's how I learned. So the more you fall and the more you fail, the more you learn. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just trying to have people understand and explore their weaknesses so they can move past why they give a shit about what I fail at,
100%.
So it's like, stop just trying to look the other way. Just look at yourself because we can only control what we can control. And I try to do what's best for myself and for everyone in my life each and every day.
That's a good point. No, it's very self-aware. And I appreciate you having me on and doing this and continuing to share everything with people because it's valuable and it's needed.
Yep. And this is all about what we can do to enhance the human body. So you're one of the first people I thought of because communication's everything. You can't learn without communication.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.
You too. Bye.
Thank you so much to Brett Bartholomew. We look forward to hearing from you again and reading your new book. Thank you again to everyone for joining us. If you have any questions for Brett, you can reach out to him at Brett Bartholomew on Instagram and all his social media channels or The Art of Coaching. If you have any questions for us, please comment, but make sure to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.